Good morning. We're looking at a passage from the 10th chapter of Luke's Gospel this morning. The story of the Good Samaritan may well be Jesus' most famous. We even have Good Samaritan laws. The phrase has just become a part of our vocabulary. The story is sometimes called a parable, but there really is no comparison of one thing to another in it, and that's what a parable is. This is an example story in which the point is to have the hearer respond by following the example of the main character. The story is set up by the question, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Some version of this question is asked in each of the three synoptic Gospels. In each case, the answer is based on Deuteronomy 6:4, a passage known as the Shema, from the first word in the passage in Hebrew. What's noteworthy is that as the verse is quoted in the Gospels, something is added, the phrase, "and mind." This should remind us that in antiquity, literary texts were not regarded as something inflexible. Quotations of any earlier document were often paraphrases. The cast of characters in this story is interesting. The priest and the Levite were familiar, sympathetic figures to Jesus' audience. We condemn them too harshly because we know how the story turns out, and we have a long history of our attitude toward Levites and Pharisees and so on. Under Jewish law, if these men came into contact with a dead body, they would be considered unclean and unable to perform their religious duties until they had gone through a long ritual of purification. So their reluctance to take a chance on touching this man is understandable. Besides, the injured man, so-called injured man, might just be bait in a trap. Ancient sources such as Josephus tell us that the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, a distance of only about 17 miles, was never safe for travel. Anyone who stopped to see if this man could be helped might be setting himself up to be attacked. The Samaritan's appearance in the story must have surprised Jesus' audience quite a bit. For the Jews of that time, the Samaritans were what the Palestinians are to modern Israelis. They lived in a territory that was carved out of Jewish land. Jews went to considerable trouble to avoid setting foot in Samaria. I'm sorry. The Samaritans were ethnically different from the Jews. They were descended from people brought in by the Assyrians hundreds of years earlier to mix with the Jewish population. They were despised because of religious differences as well in their practices and in the version of the text that they used. It's hard to understand why the Samaritan was even traveling to Jerusalem. Luke displays more interest than the other evangelists in this downtrodden minority group and uses this character effectively to point up the moral of the story. Let's read the story now as it appears in your bulletin. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This is the word of the Lord.